Iris Caldwell grew up on the industrial edge of Northbridge, where fog hugged the river and ambition tasted like metal, and she learned early that silence could shelter or surrender, depending on who controlled the story. A scholarship to Northbridge Technical Institute was labeled charity, but Iris treated it as leverage, tracking obligations and expectations with the precision others reserved for grades. During an internship at Halcyon Systems, she noticed efficiency reports never matched floor reality, and that certain signatures repeated on approvals that somehow created profit from delay. The name Victor Lang appeared often enough to feel intentional, always adjacent to plausible deniability, teaching Iris that systems rarely fail by accident. She avoided accusations and built models instead, aligning timestamps, inventory drift, and behavior until patterns resisted dismissal. Noah Blake noticed her questions not because she promoted them, but because they shortened meetings and clarified outcomes. As Iris advanced quietly, pressure mounted, invitations turned conditional, and warnings arrived disguised as career advice. A citywide blackout halted production and threatened to blame the lowest tier, forcing Iris to choose whether truth justified its cost. She released a controlled disclosure, a sequence of verifiable facts shared with auditors, regulators, and journalists in staggered order. Numbers spoke louder than statements. Accountability traveled upward, and Victor Lang's graceful exit collapsed under the weight of records. In the week after Victor Lang vanished from the executive directory, the plant did not suddenly become honest. Machines still jammed, supervisors still chased quotas, and the river fog still clung to Northbridge like a habit. What changed was the direction of fear. Before, the lowest tier had been trained to fear mistakes they could not control. Now, managers began to fear questions that could be verified. Iris watched the shift without celebrating. When power cracks, it throws glass, and she had learned to move carefully through rooms full of shards. Noah Blake asked her to step into a temporary war room. 2 whiteboards, 3 laptops, and a confidentiality agreement that finally felt like protection instead of a muzzle. He didn't apologize for missing what she had seen. He admitted he had been rewarded for speed, not accuracy. "If we fix this," he said, "we fix it in a way that survives the next victor." Iris agreed on one condition. The remedy had to be structural, not symbolic. Noah nodded, and for the first time, Iris felt like her job title matched her function. The auditors arrived first with polite shoes and hard eyes. They treated everyone with the same cautious neutrality, which meant they treated truth like a liability until it was proved. Iris gave them what they understood: reconciliations, variance explanations, and a map of approvals where a single signature had become a lever. She did not dramatize the plot. She made the plot arithmetic. The lead auditor paused over one model and asked why it was so clean. Iris answered, "Because messy truth is easier to dismiss." Halcyon's legal team tried to manage the narrative, offering Iris a severance package framed as gratitude. The number was generous enough to tempt and small enough to insult. The attached clause demanded silence about operational irregularities. Iris slid the paper back across the table. "You can pay for my time," she said. "Not for my memory." The lawyer's smile tightened. He reminded her that careers are networks. Iris replied that networks rot when people pretend rot is normal. Retaliation came the way it often does in corporations. Not as a threat, but as friction. Iris's badge stopped opening certain doors. Her calendar invites disappeared. A manager she'd never met asked her to resubmit expense receipts from 2 years earlier. Someone forwarded her an anonymous article about unstable analysts who ruin companies with paranoia. Iris documented each incident, because she understood that retaliation is a pattern, and patterns are what investigators can act on. The blackout that had halted production became the scapegoat attempt. A citywide transformer failure had killed the lights for 6 hours, and in that darkness, Halcyon's leadership tried to pin losses on the maintenance crew, claiming delayed checks caused the outage. Iris read the incident report and saw the lie. The transformer failure started off-site. The maintenance crew had done exactly what procedure required, and the only deviation came from management's decision to delay a preventative replacement to optimize cash flow. Optimize was the word Victor had loved. Iris pulled the purchase order history, highlighted the deferred replacement request, and added it to the growing ledger of proof. A union steward named Marisol Rivera requested a meeting. Iris expected hostility. Workers had been burned by outsiders who promised help and delivered headlines. Instead, Marisol brought a binder of handwritten notes, dates when sensors failed, when shipment seals arrived broken, when supervisors forced overrides that created phantom efficiency. Marisol said, "We thought nobody upstairs cared." Iris said, "I care because the math says you're telling the truth." They formed an alliance that wasn't sentimental. It was mutually protective. Marisol's reality grounded Iris's models, and Iris's models gave Marisol language that regulators couldn't ignore. When the first journalist called, Iris refused the interview. She offered documents instead, timelines, ledgers, and a recorded statement that could be used verbatim without her face attached. The journalist tried to coax a personal story. Iris said, "Personal stories are how they make this about character. This is about design." The journalist grumbled and accepted the files. 2 weeks later, the story ran with charts instead of tearful quotes. It didn't trend like scandal. It spread like a manual. Regulators moved slowly, as they always do, because they are built to survive politics, not to win races. Iris anticipated that slowness and staged her disclosures. First, she sent the auditors the approval map. Then she sent labor regulators the safety overrides. Then she sent the city commission the deferred transformer replacement history, because public infrastructure had been treated as a budget trick. Each packet was independently verifiable. Each packet stood on its own, so no one could dismiss the whole case by attacking one witness. Iris had learned to treat truth like a bridge. It must hold weight even when someone jumps on it. Victor Lang tried to resurrect himself through proxies. A consulting firm offered Halcyon a restructuring service that, by coincidence, routed fees to a shell company that traced back to Victor's former assistant. Iris found the routing code because she had trained herself to look for quiet repetitions. She flagged it to compliance. Compliance hesitated, fearing a lawsuit. Iris sent them the public corporate registry links, the bank metadata, and the internal email chain showing Victor's prior involvement. Compliance stopped hesitating. They terminated the consulting offer and preserved the evidence. The system didn't cleanse itself. It was pushed. Noah Blake started taking notes in meetings like a person afraid of forgetting. He began asking for second signatures on approvals, and he stopped joking about moving fast. Some executives mocked him for becoming cautious. Noah replied, "Fast is what got us here." Iris watched him absorb the ridicule without flinching. People can change when the reward structure changes. But Noah was changing even when the reward structure hadn't caught up. That mattered more than speeches. The hardest part was the human cost. A supervisor named Kent Holloway was fired for approving overrides he had been told to approve. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't powerful either. He showed up outside Iris's building one evening, furious and scared, accusing her of destroying his life. Iris listened without arguing. Then she showed him a copy of an email where Victor's office had threatened Kent's bonus unless he met numbers that required overrides. Kent stared at it, jaw working, and the rage in his face changed direction. "So I was bait," he said. Iris said, "You were a tool they expected to break." Kent left without apologizing. Iris didn't need his apology. She needed him to understand who had built the trap. Halcyon's board demanded a clean conclusion. They wanted a settlement with regulators that could be framed as compliance improvements. Iris attended the board session only because Noah insisted she should be in the room where decisions were made. The board chair thanked her for her diligence and suggested she accept a promotion in exchange for closing this chapter. Iris answered carefully. "Chapters close when the story is true," she said. "If you want closure, fund the fixes and publish the findings." The chair's smile froze. Noah spoke next, supporting her proposal. 2 board members looked shocked. 2 looked relieved. Power doesn't like being seen, but some people are tired of pretending. The board compromised, as boards do. They agreed to publish a redacted report, to create a whistleblower hotline run by an external firm, and to fund a safety retrofitting plan that could not be delayed for cash optimization. Iris insisted on a 4th item: an internal analytics unit with independence, able to audit operational claims without executive permission. Noah backed her. The vote passed by a single margin. Iris noted who voted no. Names are data. The redacted report triggered a second wave of backlash. Former executives complained online that Halcyon was bending to activists. Commentators argued that efficiency would suffer if workers were protected. Iris watched the debate and recognized the old trick: frame basic accountability as an ideological threat. She didn't respond publicly. She responded by publishing a technical appendix anonymized, legal cleared, showing how the fraud had reduced efficiency by creating rework and breakdowns. The appendix made the argument in language executives understood. Accountability, it turned out, was cheaper than corruption. Over months, the plant changed in ways that were not cinematic. Sensors were replaced. Override logs were reviewed weekly. Maintenance schedules were funded in advance instead of begged for later. The union steward Marisol began bringing Iris small victories. Fewer injuries, fewer forced doubles, fewer mysterious missing pallets. Iris didn't smile more, but she slept deeper. Safety is a kind of quiet that arrives after work is done. One evening, Iris received a message from a first-year student at Northbridge Technical Institute asking how to be brave in an internship. Iris typed back that bravery was overrated and often misused. "Be precise," she wrote. "Write things down, ask questions that have answers, and don't let anyone rush you into forgetting what you saw." The student replied with a thank you and a promise to keep a notebook. Iris stared at the screen longer than necessary, thinking about her younger self, and about how knowledge travels when you don't try to own it. The prosecutor finally filed charges against Victor Lang for fraud and obstruction. Victor didn't appear in court. His lawyers did. They attempted to cast Iris as a disgruntled employee who misunderstood complex operations. The judge asked why Victor's signature appeared on approvals tied to shell vendors. The lawyers said it was administrative. Iris's models, entered as exhibits, showed how administrative choices created profit from delay. Words lost weight in that courtroom. Numbers carried it. Victor's defense team attempted to discredit the blackout evidence, claiming it was unrelated infrastructure noise. The city commission disagreed after reviewing the deferred replacement documentation. A commissioner publicly admitted that the city had accepted Halcyon's narrative because it was convenient to blame workers instead of negotiating upgrades with a powerful corporation. Iris watched that admission on a webcast and felt an unfamiliar warmth that was not joy but recognition. Sometimes institutions can be embarrassed into honesty. The case ended not with a dramatic confession but with a plea deal and restitution. Victor surrendered assets, paid penalties, and accepted a ban from corporate leadership roles. Some people called it too lenient. Iris called it instructive. It set a precedent that records can climb higher than convenience. It made it harder for the next victor to assume immunity. That, Iris believed, was the real punishment, the loss of invisibility. With the legal dust settling, Iris faced a decision she hadn't admitted she was postponing. Whether to stay at Halcyon. The place had shaped her like pressure shapes metal. Leaving would be relief. Staying would be influence. Noah offered her a permanent role heading the independent analytics unit. He told her the board would fight it, but he would fight back. Iris considered the fatigue in her bones and the clarity in her mind. She accepted, not because she loved the company, but because she knew how easily improvements can be rolled back when the witnesses disappear. The first project of the new unit was not glamorous. Iris reviewed overtime patterns and found that certain supervisors used scheduling as punishment. She implemented an algorithmic fairness check and required supervisors to justify deviations. It was a small reform, but it changed the daily weather of the plant. People stopped begging for shifts. People stopped fearing that speaking up would cost them rent money. Iris learned that ethics is not a banner. It is a series of constraints that protect ordinary life. As the year turned, Northbridge's river fog returned, and the city kept building new stories to tell itself. Some residents wanted the scandal to be entertainment. Others wanted it to be a morality tale. Iris refused both. She attended a community meeting once, sat in the back, and listened as workers described improvements and remaining gaps. When someone praised her as a hero, she corrected them. "This was not heroism," she said. "This was documentation, plus enough people refusing to look away." The last change Iris made was private. She visited the scholarship office at the institute and donated anonymously to a fund for students who needed emergency housing. She didn't attach her name because she didn't want gratitude. She wanted continuity. The staff member processing the paperwork asked why she cared so much. Iris answered, "Because talent dies in quiet places when nobody pays attention." The staff member nodded as if that sentence explained more than money ever could. On a cold evening, Noah found Iris alone in the war room that was no longer a war room, staring at the old approval map. He asked if she regretted any of it. Iris said she regretted every day she had waited for permission to act. Noah said he regretted every time he had chosen speed over verification. They stood in silence for a moment that felt, oddly, like partnership, not romance, not salvation, just two people aligned around a standard they hadn't had before. When Iris finally walked out of the plant gates after a long shift, she noticed a new sign posted near the time clock. "Report hazards without retaliation." It was only paint on metal, and paint can be peeled, but the policy behind it had enforcement now, and enforcement is what makes signs real. Iris touched the edge of the sign, a small gesture she didn't share with anyone, and thought about the way truth costs less when you stop paying for lies. Before the new controls took hold, there was a long season of uncertainty that never made it into press summaries. Halcyon's mid-level leadership held alignment meetings that were really loyalty tests. Executives asked employees to confirm their commitment to the mission, without defining what mission meant when the mission had been used to justify theft. Iris attended, said as little as possible, and took careful notes about who used which phrases. The language of a cover-up is repetitive. It relies on slogans so people don't have to think. Iris treated slogans as flags. She also learned the limits of documentation. One morning, a line worker named Dev Patel collapsed from exhaustion after a forced double shift. The official incident report listed personal health factors and recommended employee wellness resources. Marisol called Iris furious, insisting the schedule was the cause. Iris pulled scheduling logs and saw the pattern. The same supervisor, the same weekend, the same manipulation of overtime rules. But Dev's family begged for privacy. Iris faced a choice she hated, whether to make Dev's story a data point without consent. She chose another route. She anonymized the schedule evidence and built an aggregate model that proved the policy violation without exposing Dev. It was slower. It was also moral. The blackout night returned in Iris's dreams for weeks. In the office, it had been described as a minor inconvenience. In reality, it had been 6 hours of chaos, with forklifts stalled in dark aisles and emergency lights flickering like they didn't trust themselves. Iris had walked through the plant with a flashlight, watching supervisors shout at workers to keep production moving. When the city grid failed, the plant's backup generators were supposed to isolate key systems. They didn't, because a cost-saving retrofit had been deferred. Iris remembered the moment she realized the only safe decision was to stop the line, then watched a manager override the stop because downtime is unacceptable. That override could have killed someone. The fact that it didn't felt like luck, not safety. She wrote a detailed reconstruction of those 6 hours, not as a narrative, but as an incident timeline. Times of alarms, who authorized overrides, which systems lost redundancy, when the generator temperature rose beyond spec. She delivered it to the safety regulator with a note that said, "This is not about blame, it is about preventing the next night." The regulator responded with an inspection notice. Within days, Halcyon's safety director asked Iris to tone down her claims. Iris replied, "A generator doesn't care about tone." At the same time, investors started circling like birds that pretend to be helpful. A private equity group offered Halcyon stability funding in exchange for board seats and cost-cutting authority. The proposal arrived wrapped in words like resilience and partnership. Iris looked at the terms and saw the truth. They wanted to extract value by squeezing the plant harder, the same strategy that had produced the fraud. Noah saw it too, and for the first time he called something predatory in a meeting. The room went quiet. Iris noticed who avoided his gaze. The private equity group didn't leave after being refused. They went public, leaking claims that Halcyon's internal corruption was worse than reported. Their real goal was to depress the company's value and force a sale. Iris understood the cruelty of the tactic. They were using true harm as leverage for profit. She proposed an antidote: radical transparency with controlled detail. Halcyon released additional operational metrics and an independent monitoring plan that reassured regulators and undercut the fear narrative investors were trying to inflate. It wasn't kindness. It was defense. During this period, Iris's personal life narrowed. Friends stopped inviting her places because she always looked tired, and because they didn't know what to say about corporate scandal. Her mother worried that Iris would become a target. Her father asked why she couldn't just take the promotion and move on. Iris tried to explain that moving on without fixing the machine meant someone else would get crushed. Her father sighed like the conversation was weather. Iris realized then that integrity work often makes you lonely not because people oppose you, but because they can't imagine paying the price you're paying. The prosecutor's office requested another interview. This time, they asked Iris to walk them through how Victor Lang's decisions created profit from delay. Iris drew a simple diagram. Delay creates backlog. Backlog justifies expedite fees. Expedite fees flow to vendors. Vendors flow to shells. Shells flow back to the signer. The prosecutor asked why no one noticed. Iris said, "Because the losses were distributed and the gains were concentrated." The prosecutor nodded. The way a person nods when they realize the crime is not clever, just systematic, On the day Iris testified before a committee reviewing industrial safety practices, she wore the plainest blazer she owned. She didn't want charisma to be the story. The hearing room smelled like paper and old coffee. A council member tried to bait her into condemning Halcyon as evil. Iris refused. "Evil is a word that ends thinking," she said. This was predictable. It was the result of incentives that reward delay, punish disclosure, and treat workers as expendable. That sentence made two reporters look up. Iris continued, explaining how safeguards can be engineered: audit trails, independent verification, empowered stop work authority, and consequences for retaliation. When she finished, the room was quiet in a way that felt attentive rather than hostile. After the hearing, a former Halcyon employee approached her in the hallway, an older woman named Elsie Morita, who had been fired years earlier for attitude problems. Elsie handed Iris a thumb drive and said, "I kept copies because I knew someone would need them someday." The drive contained old emails showing that Victor's predecessor had used similar vendor games and that Victor had inherited a culture, not invented one. It complicated the narrative of a single villain. It also expanded accountability. Iris thanked Elsie and promised she would protect her identity. Elsie smiled with tired satisfaction. "I don't need my job back," she said. "I just needed someone to prove I wasn't crazy." Iris and Noah built the analytics unit like engineers build a bridge, with redundancy. They created 2 independent reporting lines so no executive could quietly shut the unit down. They negotiated budget protection tied to regulatory compliance requirements. They recruited quietly, choosing people who asked skeptical questions and didn't chase applause. Iris trained the team on one rule: if a number matters, you must be able to explain how it was made. She banned slide decks that used vague words like optimized, without definitions. The team became unpopular with managers who preferred fog. Iris accepted the unpopularity as a cost of clear air. The first major win came from a small anomaly, a pattern of inventory drift near one loading bay. A young analyst, Teo Nguyen, traced the drift to a subcontractor who was skimming high-value parts by manipulating barcode reprints. The subcontractor had been relying on busy supervisors to sign without reading. Iris required every high-value shipment to use a dual verification scan tied to employee IDs. The skimming stopped. The manager who had insisted the drift was normal shrinkage avoided Iris for weeks. Teo asked if he should feel proud. Iris told him pride is fine as long as it doesn't replace vigilance. Not every case ended cleanly. A safety retrofit vendor tried to bribe a facilities manager, offering tickets and a consulting honorarium. Iris uncovered it, but the manager resigned before charges could be filed, and the vendor threatened to sue for defamation. Legal teams asked Iris to soften language in the internal report. Iris refused to call bribery inappropriate incentives. She compromised only on one thing. She removed adjectives and left facts. Facts survive lawyers. As the company stabilized, some people tried to rehabilitate Victor Lang's image. A business podcast framed him as an ambitious executive, caught in a complex situation. Iris listened to the episode once, and then wrote an internal memo, reminding leadership that fraud is not complexity. She didn't send the memo widely. She sent it to the board members who had voted no on the analytics unit. The memo didn't accuse them. It simply outlined how normalization of abuse begins with softened language. One board member called her later and admitted the podcast had made him uncomfortable. Iris said, "Good. Let discomfort teach you what comfort used to hide." The work eventually touched the city itself. The commission proposed a modernization plan for the aging grid, funded partly by industrial users. Halcyon's lobbyists wanted exemptions. Iris presented the blackout reconstruction to the commission again, alongside cost-benefit models, showing that preventive upgrades cost less than repeated outages and emergency repairs. Marisol spoke after her, describing how darkness in a plant can kill. The commission passed the plan. When the first new transformer was installed, Iris drove past the fenced site and watched the crane lift it into place. It wasn't dramatic. It was the physical manifestation of a truth she'd fought for. Reality will be paid for either upfront or later. Years after the scandal, a new class of interns arrived at Halcyon. They asked Iris about the Lang era, the way students ask about a storm they didn't live through. Iris told them the story only in practical terms. What controls failed, what incentives misaligned, what documentation made the difference, what retaliation looked like, and how to recognize it early. One intern asked if she ever feared being wrong. Iris said she feared being sloppy more. If you're wrong but precise, you can correct. she said. If you're vague, you can't even find the error. The intern wrote it down. Iris's name never became a monument in Northbridge. It became something rarer, a reference point. When a city department proposed cutting inspection budgets, someone in the room would ask, "Have we learned nothing?" When a manager tried to push a risky shortcut, a worker would say, "Write it down." The culture didn't become perfect. It became less hospitable to quiet crimes. That was enough for Iris, because she had never been trying to be adored. She had been trying to make lying expensive. The deeper Iris dug, the more she realized that documentation is not only data, it is also timing. When she first began, she had assumed that presenting the entire truth at once was honorable. The scandal taught her the opposite. Too much truth without staging becomes noise, and noise is a gift to people who want to delay. So she learned to sequence information the way engineers sequence stress tests. Apply pressure gradually, measure response, then escalate. It wasn't manipulation. It was an adaptation to a world where attention is a scarce resource and bad actors weaponize fatigue. That sequencing mattered during the civil suits. A group of small suppliers sued Halcyon, claiming the fraud had forced them into debt when payments were delayed and expedited fees were siphoned away. Halcyon's lawyers wanted to settle quickly and quietly. Iris insisted on a public restitution mechanism with clear criteria so suppliers didn't have to beg behind closed doors. She drafted the criteria with the forensic accountant: proof of delayed invoices, proof of fee extraction, proof of downstream impact. The board resisted, worried it would invite more claims. Iris said, "If harm is real, hiding the remedy is how you repeat the harm." In the end, Halcyon published a claims portal with an independent reviewer. It wasn't generous. It was fair, which is sometimes more radical than generosity. Victor Lang tried to protect his remaining influence by turning allies into witnesses for his defense. One former executive, Daphne Coyle, publicly argued that Victor had been pushing innovation and that the company needed risk-takers. Iris requested Daphne's old emails and discovery, and found a thread where Daphne had warned Victor that the shell vendors were illegal. Daphne's signature sat beneath the warning. Iris didn't leak it. She entered it through counsel, because ethics does not require spectacle. When Daphne was confronted with her own words in a deposition, she went pale. She didn't confess to moral failure. She confessed to self-preservation. That, Iris thought, was a more common disease than corruption itself. The deposition days were draining in a way spreadsheets never were. Lawyers asked the same question 5 different ways, hoping fatigue would create inconsistency. Iris answered slowly, repeating definitions, refusing to infer beyond what evidence supported. The opposing counsel accused her of being robotic. Iris replied, "Robots are predictable. Fraud relies on unpredictability." The court reporter's fingers paused for half a beat, then continued. Later, Noah told Iris that the judge seemed to like her. Iris said she didn't need to be liked. She needed to be unassailable. At one point, an online commentator doxed Iris's address, claiming the public deserved to know who destroyed jobs. The comment was shared thousands of times before platforms removed it. Iris moved apartments anyway, not because she panicked, but because she recognized that threats have a habit of attracting opportunists. Halcyon paid for the move quietly. Iris also changed one habit. She stopped treating safety as a private burden. She accepted security support, asked friends to check in, and told her parents the full truth, instead of minimizing it to protect them. Her mother cried. Her father went silent. Then, for the first time, he said he was proud of her. The sentence landed like something solid after years of fog. The analytics unit's work began influencing product design too. Halcyon sold software that promised to optimize industrial logistics, and Iris noticed the algorithm rewarded delay because delayed deliveries created predictable inventory buffers. It was the same incentive error in digital form. She convened a cross-functional review and forced engineers to explain the objective function in plain language. An engineer admitted the model had been trained on historical data polluted by Victor-era manipulation. Iris ordered a retraining pipeline with a corrected target, minimized delay without hiding shortages. The engineers resisted at first, worried it would lower reported efficiency. Iris said, "If your efficiency requires lying about time, it isn't efficiency." The new model produced slightly uglier dashboards and significantly fewer emergency orders. Ugly truth, Iris had learned, is often cheaper than pretty fiction. The city's perception of Halcyon also shifted. A local high school invited Iris to speak about STEM careers. The organizer expected an inspirational talk. Iris delivered a practical one. how to read a contract, how to recognize when a boss is asking you to take responsibility without authority, how to keep a work notebook, and how to ask for definitions when someone hides behind buzzwords. Students asked whether whistleblowers always suffer. Iris answered honestly. They suffer if they do it alone. That's why you build networks before you need them. She gave them a list of resources, not a slogan. Teachers later emailed to say the talk scared some students. Iris replied that fear can be useful if it teaches preparation. A year after the blackout, another storm hit Northbridge, flooding a substation and threatening another citywide outage. This time, the new transformer upgrades rerouted power within minutes. The plant lights flickered and held. Workers cheered, not because they loved electricity, but because they were tired of being thrown into darkness and told to keep producing anyway. Marisol texted Iris a single line. It held. Iris stared at the message until her throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much of her tension had been waiting for that test. As stability returned, people started asking Iris what she wanted next. The question annoyed her at first, because it assumed a life is a ladder. But in quieter moments, she admitted she wanted something simple. A world where doing the right thing didn't require heroics. She began writing internal guides: how to run a fair audit, how to preserve evidence, how to avoid retaliatory scheduling, how to build models that don't reward manipulation. She distributed them freely inside the company and, where possible, publicly as templates. She didn't copyright them. She wanted them copied. If the lesson of Northbridge was that clarity compounds, then compounding required sharing. The final reconciliation happened on a day that didn't feel dramatic at all. Halcyon posted quarterly numbers that were lower than Victor's peak years but steadier, and the board finally stopped asking how to get back to those inflated margins. They had accepted that the peak had been a mirage. In a meeting, the chair said almost reluctantly, "It seems the company is healthier now." Iris responded, "Health is not a feeling, it's a set of conditions." The chair nodded, and Iris recognized it as progress, an institution learning to speak in reality instead of aspiration. None of the reforms erased the temptation to cheat, they simply increased the cost of cheating. Iris discovered this when a mid-level director attempted to bypass the dual verification system by labeling high-value parts as low-value samples. The labels were technically allowed. The intent was fraud. Iris's team caught it because the shipping weights didn't match the classification. When confronted, the director claimed it was an innovation pilot. Iris asked him to define the hypothesis. He couldn't. She recommended termination. HR hesitated, worried about wrongful dismissal. Iris provided the classification policy, the weight logs, and 3 emails where the director instructed staff to keep it quiet. HR stopped hesitating. The director left furious, muttering that the company had become hostile. Iris wrote a note for the record. Hostile to dishonesty is the same as safe for workers. The independent hotline began receiving calls from other companies in the region, employees who had heard about Northbridge and wanted to know how to document their own problems. Halcyon couldn't legally counsel outsiders, but Iris compiled a public checklist. Keep contemporaneous notes, preserve originals, use secure storage, understand retaliation indicators, and seek independent legal advice. She published it through a neutral industry association. Some executives complained she was encouraging whistleblowing. Iris answered that whistleblowing is a symptom. The disease is misconduct. If they wanted fewer symptoms, they should treat the disease. One late night, Iris walked through the plant floor after a shift change and noticed a new habit. Workers had started calling out missing safety guards without waiting for permission. A decade earlier, they would have kept their heads down. Now someone would say, "Guards off, log it," and another would respond, "Logged." It was mundane, almost boring, and Iris realized that boredom was success. Drama means instability. Boring means the system holds. She remembered the first time she had noticed a signature repeating on approvals, and how alone she had felt. And she understood why she kept doing this work even when it made her tired. She wanted the next person who noticed something wrong to feel less alone than she had. Noah joined her at the edge of the floor and asked if she ever wished she had chosen an easier career. Iris looked at the conveyor lines moving smoothly, at the maintenance techs doing scheduled checks, at the posted hotline number that no longer felt like a trap. "Easier?" she said. "Maybe, but then this would still be fragile." Noah nodded, then admitted that he had once believed leadership meant making fast decisions. "Now I think it means being willing to be slowed down by facts," he said. Iris replied, "Facts are the speed limit for harm." When the city paper later ran an anniversary piece about the blackout, they asked Iris for a quote. She gave them a single sentence. "The cost of truth is high, but the price of lies is higher." The editor wanted more, something emotional. Iris refused. She didn't want to be a headline. She wanted to be a method. And when the article published, the sentence sat on the page like a tool someone could pick up. That was the only kind of fame Iris had ever wanted. After the anniversary article, a small ripple of change reached beyond Halcyon. The state legislature introduced a bill to strengthen anti-retaliation protections for industrial workers and to require transparent maintenance reporting for critical infrastructure. Lobbyists tried to weaken it, claiming it would burden business. Iris was invited to testify again, but she declined, suggesting Marisol Rivera should speak instead. Marisol accepted and told legislators what happens when maintenance becomes optional and overtime becomes punishment. Iris watched from the back row and felt something close to relief. The story had finally moved away from a single protagonist and toward a shared responsibility. Back at Halcyon, Iris formalized the practice that had saved her early on, the evidence ladder. Step 1, observe. Step 2, verify with independent sources. Step 3, document in a format that survives scrutiny. Step 4, escalate to a party with authority. Step 5, preserve your own safety. She trained new analysts using anonymized case files from the Victor era. The exercise wasn't to shame the past. It was to inoculate the future. When a trainee asked why the ladder included safety, Iris answered, "Because truth is not useful if you're harmed into silence." On a spring morning, Iris walked along the river where fog used to cling and noticed the air was clearer than she remembered. The city had installed better filtration at several industrial sites as part of the modernization plan. It wasn't a miracle. It was maintenance, funded and monitored. Iris thought about how often people treat maintenance as unimportant because it isn't glamorous, and how that mindset had almost killed the city during the blackout. She realized that her work had always been a defense of maintenance, of attention, of records, of the small disciplines that keep large systems from collapsing. She returned to the plant and found a note on her desk from Teo Nguyen. Caught a mismatch in vendor banking details before payment. Notified compliance. Logged everything. Iris smiled. A small involuntary movement that surprised her. And then she did what she always did. She opened the log, checked the entries, and added a line of her own. Trust, she had learned, is built when verification becomes routine. Iris continued refining processes, believing resilience is engineered through patience, repetition, and the courage to document what others ignore. Iris didn't pretend the work was finished. Every quarter, new pressures arrived. Tighter margins, new competitors.